This happened a few months ago in the spring. It was a weird time in my life. I'd just graduated, didn't have any real responsibilities yet, and had way too much free time. I'd finished my semester a term early, which seemed like a great idea when I was buried in assignments. But once I actually had all this free time, I didn't know what to do with it. My full-time job wasn't starting until June, and most of my friends were still busy with classes or finals. So, until then, I was just floating, feeling like I was stuck in this limbo between two phases of my life. It was really uncomfortable and made me feel useless. I'm the kind of person who always needs to be doing something productive, so just sitting around day after day watching time slip by was really killing me. Maybe that's why I agreed when my mom asked me to check on Uncle Rick's beach house. It was an easy gig. Drive down to Rehoboth Beach, make sure nothing was leaking or broken, and do some minor maintenance to save Rick the cost of hiring someone. Oh, I should probably mention that I'm from Pennsylvania and Rick's house is in Delaware, so the drive wasn't too bad. Just a little over 2 hours. The house is huge, the kind that could comfortably fit my entire extended family every summer. All 25 of us crammed into one place, playing games and drinking too much. Those two activities are really the only special things about our family. The house isn't exactly on the beachfront, but it's not far from the beach either. It's in a quieter neighborhood surrounded by tall seagrass and winding roads. Fast forward to some day in the week that I honestly can't remember. I think it was a Thursday or something. I left in the late afternoon, which in hindsight was probably a dumb idea. The drive was pretty smooth. When I got to the house, everything seemed normal. I went inside and went through Rick's checklist. I checked the faucets, the circuit breakers, and walked around the property. Everything looked fine. Honestly, it felt weird being there alone. I'd never seen that house without board games scattered everywhere and a loud crowd of family members drinking. The silence was definitely the creepiest part about it. The place felt kind of abandoned. I'm sure all of you have some place like that, maybe a house or a restaurant or something else, that gets really noisy when your whole family spends time there together. Now, try imagining that place empty and silent. Kinda creepy, right? Anyway, it was getting late, and I hate driving at night more than anything. So I texted my mom to let her know I'd stay overnight and head home in the morning. She said that was a good idea and reminded me to thank Uncle Rick for letting me stay there, which I did. I made myself some food, messed around on my phone for a bit, then started getting ready for bed. Usually during family gatherings, I'd get stuck in one of the smaller rooms on the 3rd floor, while the other relatives took the nicer, bigger rooms. I wasn't complaining about the system. I'm just telling you how things usually went. But since I had the whole house to myself that night, I figured I'd take advantage of it. The master bedroom on the 2nd floor has its own bathroom, a big closet, and a super comfortable bed. It wasn't a hard decision. I knew that's where I'd sleep. I got into bed around midnight and fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't remember what time it was when I woke up, just that something startled me awake. I was still a bit groggy, but I was sure the sound had come from the closet, like something had fallen inside it. Without making any noise, I tilted my head to look at the closet. Even that small movement made my heart race. My mind was alert, but my body refused to move. It was like sleep paralysis, but without the paralysis. I could move. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to know if there was something in that closet or not. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself to go back to sleep, and I almost did. But right as I started drifting off, I heard it. A small thump from inside the closet. I squinted a little and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. As if controlled by some invisible force, I lay there in a state of complete paralysis, unable to control my body. Unlike before, this time it was real. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. Up until then, I hadn't really understood what it meant to be frozen in place. I listened in horror as the closet door slowly creaked open. Through my half-open eyes, I watched a dark figure step into the room. It just stood there beside the bed, motionless, watching me. Maybe 20 seconds passed, each one feeling endless. Then, in silence, it turned away and left the room. I was still completely immobile, barely breathing. The footsteps moved across the floor, but instead of going downstairs like I'd expected, they actually creaked up to the 3rd floor. My stomach churned. There was only the staircase leading up, no way out from there. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but I was too scared. I couldn't overpower a grown man. I didn't know if he was armed or not. The only thing I could do was wait. After a few agonizing moments in my head, I mustered the courage to break out of the paralysis. Quietly, I reached for my phone and called 911. As soon as the dispatcher picked up, I whispered as softly as I could, telling them there was someone in the house. I slid out of bed and just as quietly locked the bedroom door. Then I waited. The minutes dragged on painfully until red and blue flashing lights lit up the windows. I was actually kind of shocked at how fast the police got there. I ran downstairs, flung open the front door, and nearly collapsed with relief when I saw the cops. They didn't hesitate. They charged inside, moving quickly through the house. I waited outside. It didn't take long. According to them, the house was empty. I couldn't believe it. I'd heard the footsteps going up, and there was no way down after that, so he had to still be in the house. There was no other explanation. The cops insisted he must have slipped past me, that I was too panicked to notice. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I say? The guy had vanished. I wasn't comfortable with the cops just leaving, so I called Rick. Rick wasn't having it. He yelled at the cops and told them to search again, and that my life might depend on it. So they did. They searched again, more thoroughly this time. Rick told me to go with them and watch what they were doing. And I did. The officers moved methodically, opening every closet and checking under beds, tapping on walls like they expected something hidden behind them. They pulled back shower curtains in every bathroom, double-checked door and window locks, and that's when they found it. One of the windows in a 3rd-floor bedroom, the room I would have slept in, wasn't locked. One of them stayed by the door while the other went downstairs and stepped out into the backyard. I chose to go outside with the second officer, mostly because the thought of being trapped in the house with some stranger made me nauseous. The officer shone his flashlight around the yard, but there was nothing out there. He started sweeping the roof, and to my horror, his beam caught something terrifying. It was him. It was the stranger who'd been in the house. He was just sitting there on the roof. He was a disgusting bald guy in ragged clothes who looked like he hadn't bathed in years. The next hour was a blur. The cops communicated with each other and got him down from the roof and handcuffed. The cops said he was probably homeless and had been in the house for days, maybe longer. But when they asked him how he'd gotten in, how long he'd been there, and why he'd hidden in the closet, he didn't answer. He just kept this creepy blank stare like nothing mattered to him. He was in the police car soon after, and that was it. The whole thing was so crazy it's still hard to wrap my head around. No matter how hard I try, I can't figure out why that guy was hiding in that closet. Maybe he heard me enter the house and hid in the first place he thought of. I still don't know how he got into the house. Rick doesn't either. There's no way to get up to the roof from the ground, so I feel like that explanation is pretty ridiculous. The rest of my extended family has insisted that Rick upgrade the home security, but he's refused every time for reasons I can't explain. The thought that if I had slept in my designated bedroom, that night could have ended very differently. My friend Mike has a beach house on the Jersey Shore. Calling it a nice piece of property would be an understatement. It's magnificent. Or at least to someone who's never had much, that's how it felt to me. Obviously, I don't know the history all that well. It's not my family's house. But from what I do know, that house has been in their family for generations. Mike's grandparents tried to use it as a permanent residence for the longest time. But sadly, they recently passed away. No one's living there anymore, and the house sits idle most of the time because most of Mike's extended family lives on the West Coast, and his parents are too busy to make good use of it. The silver lining to an otherwise sad situation is that Mike basically has free rein to access it whenever he wants. I'm pretty sure his dad's intention was to rent the house out to try and make some extra cash, but as far as I know, the wheels haven't really turned on that. It's not exactly an easy task to find someone willing to rent a beach house during the off-season, so you can't blame the guy. It was around mid-July when Mike hit me up and asked if I wanted to head down for the weekend. He didn't have to twist my arm. I had nothing going on, and the thought of chilling at a beach house, especially a nice one, was an easy yes. His plan was simple. We'd hang out, maybe hit the beach during the day, then the boardwalk at night, and just enjoy the shore for what it was. It wasn't some wild party weekend or anything like that, just a relaxed escape from the everyday. And honestly, I was looking forward to it. Mike and I live pretty close to each other, so he was going to pick me up and drive down with me. That Friday, I packed a bag, tossed it in his trunk, and the two of us drove down. The first night was chill. We got there around 6, dropped our stuff in the upstairs bedrooms, and settled in. The house had that cozy, slightly musty beach house smell, like a mix of salty air and old wood. Not in a bad way, more like history. You could tell it had seen decades of family summers. After grabbing a quick bite from a nearby sub shop, we decided to take a little walk on the beach just to soak in the evening. Mike brought along a couple of fishing poles, so we figured we'd try our luck fishing for a bit. It wasn't really about catching anything, it was more about being out there. At one point, we ran into a couple of girls around our age. They were walking barefoot along the shore, and Mike, being Mike, struck up a conversation right away. They were locals, or at least semi-locals, and it turned into one of those low-key, kind of flirty interactions that just happen naturally when you're young and on the beach at night. We got their numbers, and they continued their walk while we kept fishing. There were still a decent amount of people around since it was peak season, but Mike knew all the quiet spots. Private beach access, hidden paths through the dunes, little pockets between houses where the lights don't reach. We eventually found a nice stretch all to ourselves, where the only sounds were the water and the wind. It was the kind of night that makes you forget real life for a little while. The next morning, we woke up around 9 and decided to go for a run along the boardwalk. It was already warm by then, but there was a breeze off the ocean that made it bearable. We didn't do anything crazy, just a few miles to get the blood flowing. Mike's a pretty active guy, and I've been trying to stay in shape, so it felt good to move after a lazy night hanging around. The rest of the day flew by without us even noticing. That evening, Mike suggested hitting up a few bars in Seaside, but we were both wiped out. While the idea sounded fun in theory, the thought of standing in lines and yelling over music didn't really match how our bodies felt after a full day in the sun. We ended up crashing pretty early instead. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a shrill beeping. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but after a second or two lying there in the dark, I realized it was real. It sounded like a smoke alarm. One of those sharp, high-pitched alerts that cut straight through your skull. I threw myself out of bed and started scanning around in an effort to pinpoint where the beeping was coming from. It didn't sound like it was coming from my bedroom or anywhere else on the second floor. After focusing for a few more seconds, I got the impression that it was actually coming from above me. Without thinking, I yanked open the bedroom door and ran straight to Mike's room. With both hands, I shook him awake and told him to follow me. He caught on immediately and rushed after me, not even bothering to throw on a shirt. Like our lives depended on it, the two of us bolted up the stairs, completely unsure of what we were running into. The third floor was almost dark, except for a bit of moonlight leaking through a window at the end of the hall. We flipped on the lights and started scanning the space, still expecting to see or smell something burning, but there was nothing. No smoke, no flashing lights, no sign of a fire. Honestly, it was baffling. Finally, after a couple of agonizing minutes searching for the source of that horrible sound, I found something. In one of the bedrooms, tucked neatly under a pillow, was a small black device. Before calling Mike into the room, I decided to check it out a bit myself, mostly out of pure confusion. It was about the size of a walkie-talkie, all black except for a flashing red light on top. That was it. No buttons, no stickers, no screen. Just a smooth black casing, that flashing light, and a single switch on the side. Or, at least, what looked like a switch. I flipped it off, and the beeping stopped immediately. Mike came into the room at the same time. His eyes went from the bed to me to the device in my hand. Neither of us said anything at first. We just looked at each other, and I could tell he was as confused and freaked out as I was. After a few more seconds of silence, he asked me if I'd ever seen that black thing before. I said no, and asked him the same, which he also said no. For the next hour, we tried to figure out what the hell it was, how it got there, and what had triggered it. But none of the answers we came up with were satisfying. Mike swore no family members of his had been in that house in years, and I believed him. I mean, why would he lie about that? Plus, who the hell would put that in their own house? You might think it was for safety or something, or maybe a replacement for a broken upstairs smoke detector. But again, there was no fire, so it didn't even prevent any emergency. And then the issue of how it got triggered in the first place, that was the scariest part about the whole thing. We were sitting in Mike's room in the dark when I had a crazy thought. I couldn't believe it hadn't occurred to me until then. The switch. I pulled out the device and very quickly flipped the switch on and off. And you guessed it. The shrill beeping started up again and stopped as soon as I turned it off. We both froze, and Mike whispered, "Oh my God." The thought hit both of us at the same time. The only way to operate the device was manually. There was someone else in the house. We didn't waste any time. Mike called the cops while I locked the door, barricading it as best I could. We waited, what felt like forever, and finally the police showed up. We hurried downstairs to meet them. After giving a very brief description of what was going on, they swept the entire house while we waited outside the front door as they instructed. When they finally came back downstairs, what they told us was horrifying. Apparently, every single window on the third floor was wide open, even the bathroom windows. And not only that, beds were flipped, drawers were pulled out of dressers, and everything was on the floor. The room where I'd found the device looked completely trashed. Even though it had been neat and tidy when we'd searched up there, I felt like I was losing my mind. And Mike did too. But after being escorted upstairs by the officers, we had no choice but to accept the reality. The officers didn't find anything else. No one hiding, no fingerprints, no weapons. After about 20 more minutes, they told us to make sure all the windows were locked and secured from now on, and to call back if anything else happened. Then they just left. Mike and I didn't feel safe staying in that house after someone probably crazy or on drugs had messed with us like that in such an inexplicable way. But we had no choice. We told ourselves we'd sleep there for the rest of the night and leave early in the morning. And that's what we did. Luckily, whoever had been in the house must have left, because nothing else happened through the night. There are still parts of that night I can't explain, and I can only imagine how Mike must feel. For all we know, whoever was in that house that night might have never left. This happened quite a while ago when I was 22. Enough years have passed that I feel safe talking about it. I just graduated with a dream job and minimal expenses because I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that. Building up some serious savings without having to worry about food or a place to sleep. And all while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all the comforts of home. It was safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Trust me, I know how lucky I was to have parents who let me stay home rent-free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I've never taken for granted. But not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened less than a month after I moved back home. I've never been the type that people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink a ton, I don't spend every bit of free time at clubs, and I definitely don't let men run my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My dad is the most important man in my life, and the whole hookup culture grosses me out. Because of all that, my life was pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, hit the gym, read a little at home, mess around on my phone, and go to bed. Weekends were for hiking, short trips, board games, and whatever else I decided I wanted to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my best friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and two other friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the tourist chaos on its own private beach and just a short walk from the water. Straight up, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents are neurosurgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first saw it, I was mesmerized. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern-style house when I see one. And Lindsay's had to be ultra-modern because it looked more like a secret military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it. Trust me, I have a ton. But out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be really inconsiderate, even if what I'm about to tell you hadn't happened. The four of us unloaded our stuff and figured out where we'd sleep. Lindsay obviously had enough separate bedrooms for all of us. But what's the fun in that? Instead, the four of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms with 2 sets of bunk beds and an attached private bathroom. We were there for 3 nights, which, in my opinion, is the perfect amount of time to spend with anyone outside your family. I tend to get pretty cranky, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to rub me the wrong way pretty easily. None of my friends are like that, but, I know I've already told you about my relatively boring lifestyle, but if there was ever a time to drink, it was that weekend with friends, so I definitely plan to let loose more than I usually do. However, we wanted to keep the first night pretty chill, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat on the sand, stargazing. The four of us were sipping White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was a faint, flickering light coming from somewhere farther down the shore. The four of us got quiet for a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as well as creepy. After a while, it was clear the light was swinging back and forth like a handheld flashlight that someone was walking with. And not long after, we realized that's exactly what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people walking casually in our direction. Not running or stumbling or moving weirdly, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing laughter, which made all of us relax a little. Considering how late it was very possible it was just a group of teenagers or even people around our age. They must have noticed us because at one point one of them yelled out, "Hey!" in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded about our age. Thea yelled back and we made small talk while they approached us. When they got close, we could see it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe 1 or 2 years older than us. They all had that typical beach guy look, which I could tell right away my friends were into, especially Thea. She's a little wild when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she's drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not like her. The guys sat down with their beers and the 7 of us kept drinking. It was actually a great time. The guys weren't flirting too hard, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and a few drinks later, and they eventually invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and leaning toward calling it a night, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to keep hanging out with the guys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to ruin everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back toward Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, probably toward wherever the guys were staying. I showered and went to bed. Sometime after 3 a.m., I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing because she should have been home by then or sleeping next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She was basically screaming into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped, and I needed to get her car right away. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water splashed in my face. I've never felt more intense fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on clothes and ran downstairs. I asked her why she was calling me instead of the police, and she assured me she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her guidance, I managed to open the driveway gate, find the car keys,